Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Shima Silavi, Project Officer and EU Representative at UNPO, Unrepresented Nations and People Organization. UNPO is very delighted to have you all here to discuss this really important issue, which is the phenomena of third country reprisals targeting diaspora by Iran, Russia, and China. We are also really grateful to have a high-level member of European Parliament from a range of political parties who are co-hosting this webinar with us. This goes out to show the importance of this issue. The co-hosts for this webinar are MEP Jordi Soleil, unfortunately MEP Hautala, who accepted to host this event, had an emergency and she could not join us. MEP David Lega and MEP Castaldo, who's going to provide us with the final remarks. Without further ado, I give the floor to MEP Jordi Soleil. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shana. Good afternoon to everyone. First of all, I would like to welcome you to this webinar on the occasion of the presentation of the UNPO's report on foreign state reprisals against unrepresented diplomats committed in Europe. Let me start by thanking the UNPO for this report and for today's presentation, aiming to give voice to some of the victims and witnesses. Today we will have the opportunity to hear the testimony of several witnesses, a speaker from the Awazi Arab minority targeted by the Iranian government, a speaker from the Uyghur minority targeted by the Chinese government, and a speaker from the Crimean Tatars targeted by Russian authorities. I would like to thank all of them for being today with us. As it is well described in the report that we are presented today, there are several forms of reprisals taking place in the European Union and originated and instigated by third countries. They go from threats to coercion to espionage, cyber attacks, and ultimately even assassinations. Obviously, when this kind of acts happen in any of the EU member states, they are usually investigated and prosecuted under the criminal law of the member state where it occurs. However, I believe that this kind of attacks have further implications that should be taken into account. Let me very briefly mention them. First point, these actions are politically motivated and have to be understood as acts of persecution of minorities or persecution of political opponents or human rights defenders, even if they occur outside of the state allegedly instigating them. So we have to take into account the nature of these acts, which is a political nature. Secondly, these actions might have international or EU law implications. For instance, the eventual participation of embassy staff in this kind of actions might be in violation of the international laws governing diplomatic relations. With regard to EU law, I would like to recall that the treaties especially mention the respect of the rights to persons belonging to minorities as one of the values upon which our union is founded. In this regard, the EU should increase the protection of potential victims living in the European Union, regardless from where they originate, regardless from their way, from where they come. And the third point, the fact that such reprisals take place in EU territory should be taken into account when developing relations between the European Union and the states behind those unacceptable reprisals. In this sense, the EU should use all its leverage, also when it comes to violations of fundamental rights committed in Europe by foreign state actors. Finally, I would like to make one last remark. Many people come into the EU with the aim to seek refuge and protection as they flee from war or some kind of persecution on the grounds of race, nationality, religion, and so on. The EU should not only welcome all these refugees, but also grant them full protection once they are in the European Union. It is not right that those escaping from war and violence eventually end up facing more violence when they get to the European Union. Actually, in my view, one of the conclusions of this UNPO report is that the EU and its member states are not doing enough in their efforts to grant the security and protection that some of them really need. So that's it from my side as opening remarks. I apologize because even though I was planning to stay during the whole webinar, I won't be able to stay due to last minute changes in my agenda. But I wish you a very fruitful presentation and discussion. And once again, thank you. Thanks to the UNPO and thanks to all the participants and the witnesses for being involved today in this webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, MEP Jordi Sole, for your opening remarks, issues we will touch upon as we go through the webinar. It's very unfortunate that we will not have you with us, but the session is recorded and is streamed live, so you will not miss anything. With that, I will go to MEP David Lega. Please, sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Shima. Thank you, Jordi, for your opening remarks. And I also naturally would like to welcome everyone to this webinar. And it is a true pleasure to co-host and to speak at this conference on the human rights situation for diaspora communities, dissidents, human rights defenders, and ethnic minorities in Europe. Thank you, UNPO, for your very hard work and dedication. And thanks also for this important and comprehensive report on a very timely issue. It is truly worrisome that the EU and European states are either unaware, unable, or unwilling to confront the rising number of attacks and intimidation conducted on their own territories. As the UNPO report outlines, foreign states, including Iran, Russia, and China, are in the process of a serious escalation of attacks. Therefore, we, the European Union, must escalate our response. We must do our utmost to protect all people's fundamental rights. And the first step is, like always, to identify the flaws. And to put it clearly, EU must firstly realize and recognize the scope and severity of the attacks. I think this event today makes a fair contribution to that, as coming together from different political groups to co-host this seminar will help to increase the awareness. But I would like to raise some additional political proposals necessary to recognize and counter the foreign states' attacks on European soil. One thing I, as the EP rapporteur on Iran, have been advocating for is the expansion and modernization of EU communication strategies. I want the European External Action Service to further strengthen its capacities to counter disinformation, hybrid warfare, propaganda, and espionage, including the creation of dedicated Stratcom task forces focused on China, but also on the Middle East, particularly Iran. We are aware not only Russia, but also China and Iran conducts extensive intelligence operations in Europe. EU must impose tangible costs on those two countries that deliberately spread disinformation to divide and harm the European Union, its member states, our partners and neighbors covered by the ENP. And talking about tangible costs, that lead me to sanctions policy. I think that the member states must finally render the EU's foreign policy pertaining to human rights issues more effective by using the rule of qualified majority voting in this field in the Council. The end of the unanimity rule particularly foreign policy area, would help the EU to conduct a foreign policy that is more effective, more proactive, and also better suited to respond swiftly to all attacks. And if I may, one last thing I would like to highlight is that the EU must demand reciprocal access to other countries. For instance, most European governments allow Chinese citizens to travel freely throughout our countries, while China routinely forbids Europeans from visiting Tibet. There's a gross disparity in diplomatic visits by Chinese and Western diplomats. Over the past decade, nearly 3 times the number of Chinese government delegations claiming to represent Tibet have visited Western countries compared to the number of Western delegations allowed into Tibet. When they arrive on our shores, the Chinese contingents bring with them a fright of propaganda. To sum up, that was some of my proposals and ideas about what the EU can and must do to address the escalation of attacks from foreign states in Europe. The one thing we know for sure is that inaction is not an option. The EU must come together as a more effective and more proactive defender of human rights. So thank you very much, and I look very much forward to hear the rest of the speakers today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, MEP David Lega. I should here announce that MEP Lega is one of real human rights figures in the European Union. He always supported our campaigns and advocacy for the rights of minorities. And we are really glad for the issues that you raised. Of course, in our report, we didn't raise the issue of the propaganda. Of course, there is a whole new research is needed in that regard. Thank you for raising that. And with that, I will start my presentation of the report finding. If my colleagues would just, yes, exactly. We would put the slides. Thank you. I will take the presenter. Okay. In the beginning, I would start by a quick background about the Compromise Space report and where does this Compromise Space Europe Reprisals against Unrepresented Diplomats stands in this series. The current report builds on the work of the UNPO in collaboration with the University of Oxford concerning compromise spaces for unrepresented people. The result was Compromise Space Bullying and Blocking at the UN Human Rights Mechanism, which we published in 2019, highlighting growing range of challenges to access UN mechanism and engage in international advocacy by these unrepresented diplomats. This has been further intensified by the COVID-19 crisis, as set out in our subsequent report, our second report, on diplomatic immunity, the impact of COVID-19 on the ability of unrepresented diplomats to engage with UN human rights mechanism, which we published in 2020. Our third report, Compromise Space Europe, in which we raised the issue of reprisals that targets dissidents, human rights activists, advocates for the right of self-determination, and minorities in diaspora. In the case of Iran, is mostly the Kurds and Ahwazi Arabs. And in the case of China, it's Uyghurs and Tibetans. And with Russia, it's the Chechens and the Crimean Tatars. The main 3 state actors, as we mentioned in the beginning, are the Islamic Republic of Iran, the Russian Federation, and the People's Republic of China. Following our desk research, we found out, we were able to categorize the mode of operation of these state actors. And I have to add that this is a thematic categorization, meaning not all state actors engage in all of these practices, but they do in most of the cases. These modes of operation are 5, which is firstly abuse of embassies, diplomats, and diaspora to threat and intimidate, which is something that MEP Jordi Solé referred to at the beginning of his opening remarks. It is politically motivated assassinations, threat to family members in the country of origin, espionage, and harassment through the use of criminal cooperation agreement, which can include extradition agreements and the abuse of Interpol Red Notice. I will go slide by slide, giving example of each of these exercises from different states that engage in these activities. The first one is the abuse of embassies, diplomats, and diaspora to threat and intimidate. There is a significant evidence that Russia, China, and Iran using intelligence agents under diplomatic cover to threat and intimidate the diaspora. Diplomatic access to a wide range of privileges and opportunities and informations facilitates these clear abuses of power. Here I give the example of Asadullah Assadi, the Iran envoy, was sentenced to 20 years in prison over the bomb plot. For example, Asadullah Assadi, according to the Belgian federal prosecutor, brought the explosive for the plot with him on a commercial flight to Austria from Iran. He could never been able to do that unless he was part of a diplomatic mission to Austria. And I have to also mention that the same type of the bomb that he brought with him from Iran is, according to media reports, is similar to the same bomb that used in 2016 Brussels Metro Malbec attack, which means if this bomb would have exploded, a lot of people would have lost their lives. He has also been traveling. Asadullah Assadi traveled all around Europe, met people, visit different settings, probably to plot a future attack. And he did that freely and easily because he was part of the mission. In the case of China, in some instances, the consular staff directly engage in intimidating dissidents on the European soil. Some of these tactics are, for example, is disguising as a student and disrupting academic conferences, or intervening in the work of European academics who are doing the research on the cause of the Uyghur people in China, in East Turkestan. The next mode of operation, of course, the classic, is the assassination. There is a significant evidence of politically motivated assassination in Europe, both by Iran and Russia. These acts range from covert operation to high-profile plots. The victims are diverse, as you can see. There are leaders, influential figures, opposition, journalists, defectors, and they often present a clearly established political or strategic threat to the foreign state, which suggests that the acts are intended not only to silence the critic, but also send a message to the community that these people are trying, that are part of. The target of assassinations have been individuals who show resilience and persistent in their position against their government, even after they leave their home countries. The highest number of Iran assassinations in Europe occurred in France. This is one of our findings. And then in this list, in this slide, I listed the names of our reported assassinations implicated that are Russia and China, Russia and Iran are responsible for. And it is important to remember that these individuals are not just a list of names. They are people who were pushed out of their country by their authoritarian regime. They lived in exile. They lived far away from their loved ones. They had families. They had hopes and aspiration for their people. And one of the goals that we're trying to raise with the topic of, with this topic, is to denormalize this assassination on European soil and not to allow these victims to be forgotten. If I can mention some of the names, are Abdurrahman Qasemlu, who was assassinated in '89. He's a Kurdish leader who, at the time of his assassination, was in the middle of negotiations over the right to self-determination for the Kurds in Iran. Or Mr. Ahmed Moulanesi, an Ahwazi Arab leader and opposition figure whose daughter was kind enough to accept our invitation to be here and provide us with her testimony. The other person I can refer to from Iran again is Abdurrahman Buruman, who was assassinated in France in '91. I should add that Abdurrahman Bruman Center, which is a human rights organization funded by the daughters of late Mr. Abdurrahman Bruman, were really important for UNPO because a lot of the information that we were able to gather was thanks to this organization and the work that they have been doing for all these past years. Other prominent figure from Russia, I can refer to Alexander Litvinenko, who was a Russian defector and a journalist who was poisoned, and many of Chechen critics of Putin and Kadyrov. With this, I go to the next slide, which is the threat to family members in the country of origin. I cannot stress enough how important this issue is. Because actually there were people we invited to come and provide us with their testimonies, and just because of this issue, this important issue of reprisal against families and intimidation of family members, they refrained from participating in our webinar. In many instances, family members and friends and acquaintances are intimidated. They are approached by security agents in order to contact their families and ask the family members to stop their activism. Is something that the Chinese government does, Iran's government does, especially with journalists. In the case of, for example, following the 2019 protests in Iran, a lot of journalists' families were approached, and some of them have even their assets frozen because of this activities, because of their work basically as journalists. The next mode of operation is espionage. All the state actors conduct espionage, Iran, Russia, China, but Iran has become increasingly involved in this field. Here I gathered a selection of examples. One of the examples that was really alarming was this spy application in Sweden. It's a driving application in Farsi, and Niang Group, which is a human rights organization in digital field, discovered that the application is actually a spy app that can access to your call log, can access to your email, and can send the information to third party. The targets, as you can see, are ethnic and religious minorities. Checkpoint and a cybersecurity company discovered a malware that was developed by Iranian hacking group, which again targeted ethnic minorities. Again, we see as you can see, these are really recent cases that were discovered. Another hacking software in the Netherlands was discovered. A data center near Harlem was used by the Iranian government to collect data from Iranian dissidents living in Netherlands, Germany, Sweden, and India. This goes to show how important it is to be alarmed about the activities that have been increasing in size by Iran in the field of cyber espionage. China and Russia do the same. And then I collected 3 examples, but the real examples are really numerous in our report. I wanted to raise the issue of countries that conduct espionage on their diaspora. The Netherlands General Intelligence Security Service, in their 2019 report, mentioned Iran, Turkey, and China, identifying them as countries that conduct intimidation and try to collect information and intelligence about their opponents in European countries. Go to next slide. Our report also finds that these countries use bilateral and multilateral criminal cooperation agreements between European countries and foreign states to conduct reprisals. This can be through Interpol Red Notice system or extradition treaties. You should know that European states have cooperated with countries such as China to detain and deport or render individuals. China at the moment has extradition treaty with 40 countries, including some of EU member states such as Bulgaria, Lithuania, Portugal, Romania, Spain, and France. And the shocking revelation was that in 2020, it was discovered that in December 2015, Switzerland and China signed a readmission agreement, which went public, as I said, in 2020. So for 5 years, it was a secret agreement. And according to this agreement, Switzerland allowed agents of Chinese Ministry of Public Security travel to Switzerland and conduct investigation with Chinese national whose stay in Switzerland was illegal. Here I put just example of the outrage and the backlash of human rights organizations such as Safeguard Defenders when they discovered this. And also the media, as you can see, The Guardian also wrote a couple of articles in this regard. So the agent traveled from China at Swiss taxpayers' expense to interview deportation targets is something that can say it was unprecedented until this moment. The other thing, in addition to extradition agreement, we have the Interpol Red Notice. The Interpol Red Notice is a request to law enforcement worldwide to locate and provisionally arrest a person pending extradition, surrender, or similar legal action. And being listed as an individual on Interpol Red Notice has many implications, among them travel restriction and defamation. I will not go too much into this because one of our speakers, Mr. Dolkan Isa, was one of the victims of abuse of Interpol Red Notice, and he was on the Interpol Red Notice for decades, and he will elaborate the issue and he will discuss the issue further. But just a figure, if you can look at the figures, according to Council of Europe, the number of red notices jumped from 2,000 plus in 2016 to 2,300 plus in 2005. And this only goes to shows how much this issue is being abused, to have this much number of red notices of Interpol in such a short span of time. And on our other side, the European Parliament Subcommittee on Human Rights, the DROA Committee, identified Russia, China, Iran, and Turkey as the countries that abuse Interpol Red Notice for their political purposes, meaning they use it in order to restrict their opposition voices in the European countries. With this, I go to the European response and discuss how Europe responded to these attacks. Our report shows in broad terms numerous examples of authorities failing to recognize and respond to these threats against diaspora community. These cases that we gather suggest that there is not enough currently being done to protect the victims and their family. And it's a sentiment that appears to be widely shared by diaspora community in Europe. Again, here I will let Haura Neisi, the daughter of the late Ahmed Moula Neisi, the Ahwazi Arab leader, to discuss this issue further during her testimony. But if you want to give some couple of examples, I can refer to the case of Mr. Sadegh Zarza, who's a Kurdish political activist. In July 2020, he was attacked by a knife. He almost lost his life. I guess he lost one of his eyesight in one of his eyes. Mr. Sadegh Zarza, before this happening to him, had already informed and communicated about the threats that he was receiving. But maybe the issue was not taken seriously because he was attacked years after he communicated that he's being threatened. And he communicated this to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Netherlands. The other case is Emran Aliyev case, who was killed in France. Emran Aliyev was a outspoken critic of Kadyrov and Putin. And despite being a refugee and under special police protection in neighboring country Belgium, due to threat from Russia and Chechnya, he also lost his life, although he was under the protection of the European states. But what does Europe has? Like, what does Europe has in its disposal in order to combat this? EU possesses a number of mechanisms and agencies and laws intending to protect it, victims and better facilitate national authorities. But the fact that these reprisals are continuing to happen and as if there is nothing to stop them, it brings into the question whether the capacity of the EU is enough to protect itself and its residents against the transnational repression. Here I put two examples that we raise in our research that I think it can be also as a good practice. So the European Parliament has the European Union has the Victim Right Directive, which has provision to heighten support and special protection for victims. So EU has the Victim Right Directive to protect people at risk. And the other thing that they have is the framework to cross-border cooperation in the order to investigate and prosecute perpetrators. That can be the arrest warrant, like the EU arrest warrant. The two examples that I want to raise in which they were successful is in the case of, to some extent, we can say that, is in the case of the assassination of Omar Israilov, another Chechen critic, is that the Polish authorities cooperated with Austrian authorities to arrest one of the accomplices. So there was a cooperation between two European states. Or in the case of Asadullah Assadi, for example, he was arrested on the way back to Vienna after a trip to southern Germany and extradited to Belgium, but only because Brussels had issued a European arrest warrant. So there are mechanisms, but in the past, with so many cases, the perpetrators either run free or they never, there was never any attempt at actually going after the perpetrators. But these two examples shows that EU has the ability to combat this issue if only it uses the mechanism that it already has. Generally, overall, current measure by the EU and member state appears inadequate to support and protect the victims and prosecute the responsible people and to combat the ongoing reprisals conducted by foreign authoritarian states. For example, we are really far away from, for example, the Uyghur Human Rights Policy Act of the United States, by which the federal law requires various federal U.S. government bodies to report on human rights abuses by Chinese government against Uyghurs who even live in America. I mean, if you want to do a comparison, EU still doesn't have those body of guidelines or laws specifically in order to protect the people in diaspora. I'm at the end of my presentation. I exceed also 1 minute. I'm just going to read the recommendation that UNPO presented in the report. First recommendation is that the European Union, coordination with national authorities, should study the phenomena of and response to reprisal in Europe. The research could include, for example, a European Parliament Research Service cost of non-Europe study. The UN, through its work on intimidation and reprisal, should initiate a study and assessment of UN host country efforts to protect non-state actors and avenues for better coordination with host countries. This could build on recent efforts to ensure the coordinated and coherent response to reprisals, which include designation of UN staff focal point, sharing of policy development and good practices, and documentation of trends and cases, including at the country level, to protect relevant individuals and groups. European countries hosting the United Nations and other international or regional organizations should examine their policing and prosecutorial practices and criminal cooperation agreements. And this is it was our last recommendations. I would like to just conclude that this reprisal are not stopping. At the time that we finished the report in April, we've been hearing new cases. One of the most recent cases that goes back to 3 months maybe is about an Iranian couple in Sweden who pretended to be Afghan refugees, but now they are involved in an espionage case. And we will have a second phase for our report in which we're going to interview. We're going to reach out to these communities in order to hear from them and gather their testimonies. And hopefully we would in near future publish the second phase of Compromise Space Europe report. Thank you very much. And thank you for listening to this presentation that I have about our report. I would leave the question for the end of the webinar. With this, I will give floor to Hawra Naisi, daughter of the late Mr. Ahmed Moula Naisi, the Ahwazi Arab leader and political opposition who was unfortunately assassinated in 2017 in the city of Hague in Netherlands. Thank you, Hawra. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Shaima. I hope you all hear me well. If not, please let me know. Well, I try to keep my presentation very brief. I am going to just to give some instances of the threats that my father received. And if I have more time, I'll elaborate on them even more. But so yeah, my name is Hawra. I am the daughter of Ahmed Nisi, who was assassinated on the 8th of November 2017, as you mentioned, Shaima. And yesterday was the 4th anniversary of his assassination. And as a family, we always wanted the story of our dad to be heard, especially by politicians whom we believe have the power to take action. So yeah, I feel very honored to be here today and share my testimony as a witness. And actually, ironically, yesterday I had a seminar on how a historian, I am a student of history, on how a historian, well, the seminar was on how a historian should engage with testimonies and witnesses. But yesterday I was in the chair of a listener, of an interviewer, and today I am in the chair of a witness. So I am in a way thankful for knowing the important role that both the listener and the witness play in the construction of past events, and in order to gain a better understanding of our reality. And yeah, I hope that when we finish this webinar, that we can honor both the witnesses and the listeners by honoring the testimonies that are going to be given today, by taking concrete actions. So this is just a bit of introduction, and now I'm going to elaborate on my dad's story. So my dad, as previously mentioned, was a political activist who refused the Persian nationalist narrative as an ideology of the state, of the nation state of Iran. He refused this narrative because he believed that the Ahwazi people have no place in it, and he translated his beliefs into actions. However, there was no space, no room for his activism, so he had to leave the country, I believe in 2005 or in 2006. And my father ended up in the Netherlands as an invited refugee. Supposedly, invited refugees are kind of guaranteed safety. So after coming to the Netherlands, after a year, we followed him and we settled down in the Maastricht in the south of the Netherlands. However, 2 years after that, so I believe in 2009, the Iranian regime released a documentary about the independence movement in Ahwaz in 2005. And in this documentary, my father's pictures were shown, along with other Ahwazi political activists. They were described as terrorists that should be returned back to Iran. In the documentary, it was stated that the regime knew where these activists lived and that it could reach them if it wanted to. So it was a very explicit threat. And my father immediately recognized it. So immediately he filed a police report. And shortly after that, we moved to The Hague because Maastricht is not a multicultural city, so we stood out as foreigners. But The Hague is more multicultural, and it is supposed to be the city of peace and justice. So my dad thought we could blend in more. However, the threats did not end there, because soon after that, we received a call on the landline phone. That was in 2010 or 11, I believe. And I was the one who picked the phone call. There was an Arabic-speaking person who claimed to be my father's friend. So I went to my dad and I told him, Dad, your friend is on the phone. He's from Ahwaz. And my dad was shocked because he never gave his phone number, our phone number, to anyone, not even his parents or siblings in Ahwaz. Nobody knew where we lived. So he asked me to tell this guy, this person, like that he called the wrong number and that he should never call again. But my dad recognized that this was just probably the intelligence service of Iran trying to get a confirmation of where we live now. And a while later, it became apparent that Iran is taking serious action because a member of the Ahwazi community, whom I'm not going to reveal his name today, came to my dad and he made a confession. He confessed that the regime had made a deal with him, that the regime promised this person to be reunited with one of his family members in Europe in exchange for him to poison my father. However, after this person was reunified with his family member, he changed his mind and decided not to poison my father. So he came and he confessed, but he refused to go with my father to the police and to file a report. But nonetheless, my dad wanted to make this, to register this. So he went to the police with one of his friends and attempted to file a report. But we had a problem because there was no specific suspect. And so no report could be filed. So my dad came back empty-handed. Another instance of these threats is that when my dad was attending a conference in Leiden in the Netherlands, I'm not sure of the exact date, but I think it was in 2014 or 2015, when a letter was discovered, a threat letter, in one of his colleagues' cars. And after that, we went to the police again and we tried to file a report, but again, we did not have a specific suspect, we did not have a name, so the report could not be registered. And so in the Netherlands, they have a system, aangifte, which is a police report, but also a melding or a notification. So they said, we cannot make a report, but we are going to register it in the system as a melding. After that, my dad always felt that he was being followed everywhere, but he could not know who. Is it one person? Is it multiple persons? He just didn't know. But he still wanted to make that clear for the police as well. So again, we went to the police, and I went with him actually on that day, and we tried to report that. But it was the same story. This was not a concrete fact, and it was deemed insufficient for the police to take action upon it. So again, it was only a notification was registered in the system, and that's it. But my father's fears obviously became a reality because, Iran was indeed after him, because on November 8th, in the afternoon, my father went to attend the funeral. And after that, he invited some of his friends to come to our house and have a tea. And so as he was getting out of the car to open the door for them, the assassin was waiting for him, and he was murdered in front of our house in The Hague, a few minutes walk from the Dutch parliament. And until this day, we don't know who did it, but we know that the Dutch intelligence service, the AIVD, released a statement in January 2019, I believe, in which they stated that it is most likely that Iran is behind the assassination. But so until today, we do not know who specifically committed the assassination or other people who are probably involved in it. But as a family, we hope for a couple of things, actually. Firstly, we hope that people, including politicians, be aware that most assassinations are framed in the media as if those people who were assassinated deserve to be killed. So because my dad did not share the same ideology as the ideology of the regime in Iran, he deserved to be killed because he is a threat to this united nation in Iran. So this is the first thing we hope, that my dad did not deserve to be killed, nor other Ahwazi people, nor other Kurdish, Azeri, or Baluchi people deserve to be killed in this way. And it should not be framed this way in the media, and it should not be framed this way by politicians as well. Secondly, we urge the European Union and European countries to take action against Iran and bring the perpetrators before justice. And thirdly, this is more specific, we demand improving the system to ensure the safety of Ahwazi political activists and other political activists around the world. The system is constructed in a way that requires a specific suspect. So as long as you do not have a specific suspect, the police nor other institutions can take any action. But when political assassinations are committed, usually the victims do not have a specific suspect. So this system is still lacking, and we hope that it could be improved. And the third thing we demand is that do not marginalize our feeling of being or do not marginalize the threats as just a feeling of being unsafe, because this is what we often hear, that where there is no fact that you are being followed, there is no fact that you are being threatened. But then after it happens, well, yeah, we didn't know because there were no facts, but still we have a victim. So we hope that this would improve. And we also demand that police officers in Europe be trained to have a better understanding of these kinds of threats that my father received, because obviously many police officers tended to think that my father was delusional, and so they did not take his worries seriously. And we all have seen what happened as a result of this marginalization. And so we hope that maybe trainings be organized to these police officers to know how to deal with these kind of threats that are often related to intelligence service, and not to marginalize them into just delusions and just a feeling of unsafety. So this is basically in short, our demands. And thank you very much for listening. I hope I did not, well, I think I took longer than expected. I'm very sorry for that. But yeah, thank you for listening a lot.
Thank you so much, Haura. Thank you for accepting to joining us. Thank you for presenting your testimony. I'm sorry, maybe I should have mentioned this, but yesterday was the anniversary of your dad's passing away, and to be able to come here so strong, so brave, so eloquently putting your words and sharing and giving recommendation and asking for a change and raising your voice and saying we are not delusional when we're talking about reprisals. Just because we cannot show anything on paper, it doesn't mean that we are under threat. And thank you very much for your testimony. I will pass the floor now to 1 second. Is it Lucia? If you can help me with, yes, I will pass the floor to Mr. Dolkun Isa from the World User Congress. The floor is yours, Mr. Isa.
Thank you, Shima. Do you hear me? It's fine? Okay, thank you. Well, first, thank you for inviting me to speak here today, and thanks and the Secretary General Ralph Bunchu and the Shima and all UNPO staff, and also I'm very happy to meet here Parliament member Mr. Lega and some other. Yes, we met 2019 in person, but since 2 years because of the pandemic, I'm so happy to meet you. So, as a human rights defenders working on China, I'm quite familiar for reprisal. Uyghur activists even outside of China is not safe. Chinese government constantly monitors, harassed, and threatens Uyghurs living in abroad, even in the European Union as well. They try to force Uyghurs to spy on each other, and they denied Uyghurs new passport, and recently to force host country to return Uyghur refugees to China, where they are disappeared or subject to grave abuses. Example, 2018 in April, and one of the Uyghurs refugees who is named Dilshad, I know him very well. I met him a couple of times. He was in the Munich, same city with me. He was forced deported with administration mistake to China by the German police. Yeah, this is just the example. So far, since then, after that, and the German government and saying all this administration mistake, then they are announced a special rule. Any Uyghur refugees will not be deported to China again. This is the good decision. Of course, however, still we haven't got any news about Dilshad's case. So far, we know, this is particularly outside the European country, it's a very common case. Quite a lot of Uyghurs, the refugees deported to China. As we know, around 800 Uyghurs refugees deported to China from different countries last 2 decades. Last example, 109 Uyghur refugees deported from Thailand to China to 2015, 6 years before. Since they are deported, we couldn't get any news about them. They are still alive or death sentence, because we had very bad experience in the past. Pakistan government, they deported 1997 13 Uyghur refugees and students to China, and most of them were killed at that time. So another case is 22 Uyghurs refugees deported from Cambodia to China, 2009. And 2017, 22 Uyghur students deported from Egypt government in recused by the Chinese government to China, and a couple of 500-600 Uyghur students after this was happening, then left from Egypt to Turkey, some of the European country. Yeah, anyone who speak about the what China is doing to the Uyghur people, risking having their family member detained in camp and punished for raising voice. Many of us are EU citizens or residents, yet foreign power is violating our basic right. I'm the one of them. And the Chinese government used the hostage, family hostage politic, trying to silence all Uyghur human rights defender activists. As maybe as you know, and my mother, she was 78 years old lady. She was detained 2017, and she is staying 1 year in one of the Chinese concentration camp. She died one of the concentration camp 2018. I lost contact 2017. More than 1 year later, I got this heartbreaking news. And another heartbreaking news, 2020 January, I learned from the Chinese media my father died, passed away, but still I have no idea what condition, where, which day, which year he passed away. This year, June, I got another sad news from my country. My younger brother, Khushtar Isa, he's sentenced to life, And my older brother, he is a mathematics professor. He's sentenced, some also say 24 years, some say 70 years. But however, I couldn't access since 2016. This is the prize, and as a human rights defender and advocating for the Uyghur right, I pay this prize. But my case is not unique. Most of some Uyghur, particularly Uyghur activists who live in Europe, United States, around the world, have a similar problem. So in current context, many European countries have signed extradition treaty with China. As already Shima explained on this, even Belgium and Spain, quite a lot of countries. For activists, this extradition treaty are of great concern. And the current judicial review procedures of extradition requests, they are not only potential threat to our freedom expression movement, as Beijing may seek for extradition of statement we make in Europe, because China's government misuse it. Recent case of Idris Hassan, Uyghur activists feeling from Turkey in hope is reaching Turkey was arrested in Morocco. As China had an Interpol Red Notice against him. Actually, he's a computer scientist. He's not politician. He's nothing, because he's speaking against Chinese genocidal policy. He's currently facing extradition with China, as a Morocco has ratified an extradition treaty with China. And his case, and more example to what is happening to Uyghur all this, he still is waiting and the next court in Morocco. So for the red notes, for my experience, I got a lot of problem because red notes, because Chinese government put my name to the Interpol Red Notes 1997. Well, I only learned about my red notes 2 years later. 1999, when I was in the Frankfurt U.S. General Consulate to get a visa, because that time I was not a German citizen. I wanted to go one of the conference in the United States, so I went to the U.S. General Consulate to visa application. Then I was detained by the U.S. security guys in the U.S. consulate, and the German, they handed over me to German police. I was detained more than 6 hours, and finally I was released because I was a political asylum seeker. My case was accepted by the German government, and German police say, oh, okay, we research you, you are a students leader in China, so you will be safe in Germany. But if you go as a country, maybe your life will be dangerous, particularly outside European country. However, because of the red notes, I was detained so many country border. 2005, when I was in the Geneva for attending UN Human Rights Council, because of Chinese accusation, because of red notes, I was detained by the Swedish police. They took my fingerprint, questionnaire more than 6 hours. Finally, I was released because of the protest. So many international NGOs. And 2009, when I was in the South Korea, Seoul, I was invited to one of the international conference, Seoul. I was arrived, then I was passport control, you know. They are saying, and they will not allow to the South Korea. Well, okay, then because I was stopped border, I was stopped United States in the international DC International Dallas Airport. It was not first time, and I had a lot of bad experience of this. I said, okay, then you can send me back to Germany. But unfortunately, she didn't send me back immediately. I was detained 4 days in the Seoul airport. Well, despite of German citizen, because South Korea government, because of the Chinese government recuse, already decided me deported to China. Only the 5 Chinese police arriving from Beijing to the Seoul airport, they are ready to pick up me. Then it was a big issue, and one side German government, one side United States, and the European Union, there are really strong pressure to the South Korea, other side Chinese government. Then finally, I was secretly deported to Germany, not China. So it was happening in 2009. Then after that, in 2016, I was invited to one of the conferences, Dharamsala, this Tibetan, Chinese Democrat, and Mongolia. We had one conference. I got electronic visa. But after Chinese government foreign ministry spokesman and the protest in their government, and my visa was denied after 1 week later, so I couldn't travel to India. Well, this is just an example, you know, and so in the 2017, when I was in Italy, Italian Senator Campagni, he invited me to the jointly press conference in Italian Senate. I arrived 1 day before, next day in the morning, just 20 minutes before starting the press conference. I went to the Italian Senate. I saw more than 20 Italian police are waiting for me. So I was firstly talked to the police station. I informed German Foreign Ministry and German ambassador in Rome and protest Italian government and asked them immediately release. We never recognized the red notes, but however, I was treated like criminals. He took my fingerprint, took the pictures, and around 4 hours questionnaire, then I was released. It was happening in the middle of Europe, despite of the I'm the European citizen and the German citizen. It was happening. So yeah, so far today I cannot enter Taiwan, even I couldn't enter couldn't enter Turkey, despite my red notice was delayed. I have fighting delayed my red notes. Finally, 2018 in February, more than 2.5 years, my red notes was delayed. But still, I cannot travel out of country. Just a couple of weeks ago, is 14 or 18 September, I was traveling to Turkey. But I was stopped in the Turkish body in Ankara, and they deported me to Germany again, to Germany. So because of the red notes, I'm still cannot enter. However, some country is corrected this mistake. For example, United States corrected this mistake. I travel in United States no problem anymore. Since 2012, I got even a Human Rights Award or some prize. But some countries still didn't let me to enter because of the Chinese pressure. So Chinese government not misuse the all international norm and misuse Interpol or some other international system. Chinese government long on today are even quite a lot of place. For example, in the UN human rights system, you know. Today, Chinese government trying to manipulate the UN Human Rights Council or some other international platform. 2013, during the Universal Periodic Review UPR on China, my delegation and I, who were present during the review, were suddenly asked by the leave leaves a UN premise by the UN Security Guard without explanation. I later discovered that request of the Chinese mission. UN had provided my name and the other Uyghur activist name to the Chinese mission. 2017, I was expelled from the United Nations Permanent for Indigenous Issue, New York, by the UN Security Guard without any explanation. Despite my official NGO accreditation, I was given to no explanation of this is that. But next year, similar incident took place during the UN Permanent Forum on the Indigenous Issue in New York, but this time German ambassador, United States ambassador, and the EU ambassador really hard working on my case. Then and I finally successfully attending this UN meeting and attending my statement. But however, Chinese missions, Chinese guy follow up me in the UN, inside United Nations. If I go to the cafeteria, someone follow up me, watching me, takes pictures, and make me video film. Even they are doing this in the United Nations. So my personal experience is on the clear example, and what the lengths of China is willing to go, silence, retaliate against the human rights defender in the multilateral and the space. And China is also undermining norm, values, and international system, win-win solutions in and to very concept of human rights and the UN Human Rights Council, and my not sure any useful UN human rights mechanism. So it is so we should take our current system or common value for granted. Today, Chinese government not only threatened for the Uyghurs and even also Hong Kong. We all have seen the Hong Kong's democracy. Hong Kong's democracy over. Never keep its promise. We have seen very clear. So today, Chinese government not only is threatened for Uyghur activists, Tibetan activists, Hong Kong's, Taiwanese activists. Today, Chinese government imposed it is authoritarian system, facial recognition technology, voice technology for other country, even some European country. So today, Chinese Communist Party, Chinese government not only threatens Uyghur and in China, even threatened to international global human rights and democracy. So it is the people should be thinking on this, and the particular European country. It is not correct time, business as usual, but still today is Chinese government commit genocide against Uyghurs since 2016. But still we haven't seen concrete action. We have seen small step, but it's not good enough. If you continue let the Chinese government influence and arriving into the European country, maybe up to 10 years later, really we are the European people and China trying to today. We have seen even Chinese long arm reaching some academic level in the European institution. So many European university, So it is very critical situation at the moment. So we wish, and all European countries, particularly all democratic nations, all human beings should be wake up and they should realize threatens to global democracy. So I hope my time is.
Este?
Thank you so much, Dokon. I'm sorry, I was just speaking with one of my colleagues. Can you hear me? Yeah. Thank you so much, Dokon, for your testimony. When we talk about the price that you have to pay when you become a human rights defender, it's just really heartbreaking knowing that you lost your mother and you couldn't see her. Or the fact that we had talked about you being on the Interpol Red Notice, about the fact that you couldn't even travel with your family, the vacations you lost, the defamation, the money that you had to pay to the lawyers, and the years at the time that it took from you. It's just eye-opening, and thank you for sharing your testimony with us. With this, I go to Miss Ayla Bakali.
Can you
The
hear
floor
me?
is yours. Yes, yes,
Oh,
yes, ma'am.
finally. Finally. I
Please,
just so apologize. I still have a little bit computer issues. Thank you for bearing with me. I could
no
see
problem.
that it's kind of delayed in motion. Well, I just learned so much from everyone's speaking here today. And of course, I would like to first and foremost thank you, NPO, for this excellent selection of topic. Compromise space, Europe, third country reprisals against human rights defenders. It's almost as if you read our mind. The use of this conceptual space in the political arena has a significance from time to time and from place to place. And your topic is well rooted in the people's consciousness. And it's very, very interesting to hear. But with respect to the Crimean Tatars and the Crimean Tatar situation, the occupation of the Crimean Peninsula of Ukraine in 2014 by the Russian Federation and its military aggression shortly thereafter in eastern Ukraine, the indigenous Crimean Tatars and Ukrainians continue to seek spaces to voice against their occupation. And the reprisals have been both overt and discreet, but nonetheless experienced. Ukraine's people in occupied territories are faced with two extremities. At one end of the pole, they see a Ukrainian mainland where there is sizable freedom in all spheres of society. And in occupied territories, their space is restricted. And to a greater degree, all spaces are closed for those who are against the occupation. Ukraine's constituents in the occupied territories felt solidarity with the international community, with Europe, given the multiple resolutions in support of Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity, to wit, the adoption of UNGA Resolution 262 in March of 2014 by the 68th session. Overwhelmingly, majority of 100 UN member states gave a loud and clear message on its full commitment to the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine within its recognized borders. Now, additionally, in 2016, the Third Committee of the UN General Assembly dealing with humanitarian and social issues adopted another resolution on the situation of human rights in the Autonomous Republic of Crimea and the city of Sevastopol, Ukraine, which referred to Russia directly as a state occupier. Moreover, Russian military aggression in Crimea was officially recognized in two PACE resolutions on the political consequences of Russian aggression in Ukraine, and another resolution also in 2016 on legal remedies for human rights violations. And I have not mentioned over 8 resolutions which prompted the General Assembly to adopt situation of human rights in the Autonomous Republic of Crimea and the city of Sevastopol, Ukraine. So, with all this international support, the people of Ukraine in occupied territories believed that the wind was behind their back, that there was hope for Ukraine to regain back their territories. But the sad part of it is the overwhelming dominance and repression in occupied Crimea and the military aggression in eastern Ukraine, with an increasing isolation of hundreds of people in prison camps and the cruel and inhumane conditions continue as we speak today. Ukraine, in its effort to break the monopolization of its space, created the Crimean Platform in August 2021, which was held in Kiev in order to address the continual persecution and arrest of Crimean Tatars and Ukrainians in occupied Crimea. The participation of representatives of 46 states and international organizations attended this Crimean summit, and the deputy representative of the Crimean Tatar Mejlis, the renowned leader Neriman Celal, who traveled out of occupied Crimea into mainland Kiev, but was arrested on his return back home in September 3 to 5th, ensuing a sharp escalation of repression which took place. The criminal charges against Neriman Celal, together with two of his other fellow friends, Aziz Aktem and his cousin Azhan Aktem, seemed evidently linked with the inauguration of the Crimean platform and Celal attendance in it, and the reprisal that he felt was imprisonment. The former Crimean Tatar released prisoner stated, and I quote, "Every time Crimean Tatars, Ukrainians, leave Crimea, the families worry if they will return home. It's like crossing a river full of crocodiles, and it's only a matter of chance." Allow me to present to you another example of how restrictions of space and reprisals are exercised against the Crimean Tatars and the people of Ukraine at the United Nations. In particular, the participation of indigenous Crimean Tatars at the annual UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues will show you how these reprisals play out. This indigenous platform is quite unique. It is the most attended conference at the United Nations. There are approximately 500 indigenous representatives that attend annually. And indeed, they are a tour de force who travel from remote places, wearing their indigenous costumes, bringing their indigenous traditions and language to the UN. And they come to speak 3 minutes on the thematic topics in order to increase the visibility of their indigenous issues. The Permanent Forum is a high-level advisory body and holds a mandate to discuss indigenous issues. It is the UN's central coordinating body for matters relating to indigenous people. It is, for the Crimean Tatars, the space to voice our concerns, wishes, demands before the forum. The forum is also another aspect to this, is an achievement of indigenous peoples themselves in creating an alternate space within and outside of UN. And moreover, if I can say that it is also about building relations between indigenous people and their respective government, their nation states. So you can understand why this 2-week conference is so critical for indigenous representatives to be heard and to be seen. What may seem just a mere list of speakers at the UN waiting to be called to make their intervention statements is more complicated than what I have just stated. After the completion of the very colorful, beautiful ceremonial session with beautiful indigenous music, voices, and sounds, we are then instructed to list our names as list of speakers and our affiliations the next day beginning at 9 a.m. and the forum starts at 10 a.m. So you can imagine that our Crimean Tatar delegation is anxious to register its name early in the morning so it can present its case in a room full of attendees. Along with they are just like along with the others who travel thousands of miles just for this 2-3 minute statement. We run this process every year since 2014. And the Crimean Tatar delegation diligently makes certain that the names of the speakers with their affiliation and the thematic topic for the day and time is registered properly. We confirm with the desk that that is situated within the forum conference room. It's the biggest room. It's conference room 4. It holds the most people. So the protocol in the selection process is for intervention statements is conducted by the chair of the forum, who may intersperse the interventions of participating states with interventions of international organizations, representatives of United Nations systems, and representatives of non-governmental organizations. And of course, finally, organizations of Crimean Tatar people and representatives. Given the UN Permanent Forum is a 2-week session that runs from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. at the General Conference, and not to mention the multiple side events that take place, it is quite reasonable that Crimean Tatars be called upon for their statements at a reasonable time without continually visiting the desk to confirm as the next speaker. At early morning, we are listed perhaps when we go early in the morning, the whole delegation is there. We go early in the morning to be listed. So we usually are the 6th. There are other protocol that, of course, we respect. And when we are waiting for our time to speak, it's not coming up. We know that we're 6th, already 10, 12 speakers pass by. So when we approach the desk again to reconfirm that in fact we are in line to speak, when we approach the desk, we learn that we are 33rd speakers on the list. There are times when we wait for 3-4 days to make our intervention statement. And we do not leave the room afraid that we may miss our turn. We hear sometimes same groups, same representative speak, same day, same slot on multiple occasions, but the indigenous Crimean Tatars still wait to be heard, given that their homeland is occupied by the Russian Federation. It is remarkable how this can be the case. It's
I lost Ayla. Am I the only one?
No, we are here too. Look, she disconnected, I don't know.
I guess we lost Ayla.
think we lost Ayla, yes.
It's only us three now, no?
Yes, I think Ayla got disconnected, but we will reach out because she still has a couple of minutes of her testimony. I don't know, Lucia. She's coming. No, okay. Accept our invitation. Dr. Fiona McConnell, she's an associate professor in human geography and fellow and tutor at St. Catherine's College, Oxford, and the recipient of the Philip Leverthumble Prize of Geography in 2019. And we've been working with Dr. Fiona McConnell for years now, as I said in the beginning of the presentation, with our Compromised Space UN report. Without further ado, I give the floor to you, Dr. McConnell. Thank you.
Many thanks, Shima, and everyone who's attending the webinar. And many thanks for the opportunity to speak at what is such an important event. It's really, really hard to follow these speakers. We've heard such powerful testimony of the threats, intimidation, and harassment reprisals that these individuals, their family members, and wider communities are faced with. The fact that this is happening on European territory to European citizens and residents in the current period, it really just fundamentally challenges any idea that Europe is a safe space. And I think it's so important that UNPO has issued this report that is bringing together such witnesses to really raise the profile of this issue.
Okay. Oh, sorry.
Okay. Shima, do you want me to continue? Do you want to switch over to Ayla?
No, please, you can continue, and we'll go back to Ayla for her final pieces
Sure
of
thing.
testimony.
So what I want to do with the time I've got is to step back from the details of the cases that we've been hearing about today and that Shima has presented in the report as well, and to try and set these issues in some broader context very briefly. So I've had the real privilege of working with the UNPO over the past 12 years or so, and part of that work has been on what we've framed as the notion of compromised space. So this started about 2015, 2016, when we were collecting together what was at that stage anecdotal evidence that what we termed unrepresented diplomats, so those who advocate on behalf of unrepresented nations, peoples, and communities who don't formally have a seat at international forums. The fact that they were finding it increasingly difficult to engage with international diplomacy at a time when the issues that they were seeking to raise were increasingly timely and important. So a real growing crisis of international reprisals alongside a closing of space for raising human rights issues. So we undertook research in 2016 to 18 involving some of our speakers today, so thanks to you. So a survey and in-depth interviews with representatives of 55 different unrepresented communities. Which was published in 2019, as Shima mentioned in the Compromised Space Bullying and Blocking report, where we documented how unrepresented peoples face a really growing range of challenges in accessing United Nations mechanisms and engaging in international advocacy more generally. So just to briefly set that context, because I think it speaks quite directly to some of the issues we've been hearing about today, we documented a series of blocking tactics, so tactics used by particular UN member states to silence the voices of unrepresented diplomats. So this ranged from certain states preventing NGOs from obtaining ECOSOC status and thereby being able to participate in a full range of UN forums, the use of government NGOs to challenge what human rights defenders are saying inside UN meetings and to take up valuable space, which should be designated for civil society, and the kind of blocking of travel documents to prevent individuals from attending UN meetings. We also documented a series of bullying tactics, and again, these ranged from interruptions to speakers making their interventions on the floor, and again, Uyghur speakers and speakers from Crimean Tatars have been subject to this. A recurrent tactic employed by states is to attach labels of separatists or terrorists to unrepresented diplomats, and we've heard that again today from Hara and from Dolkan, that this label is attached and therefore it flags it in terms of international travel and restrictions in being able to speak on behalf of communities. And then, of course, another issue that we documented in those reports was the use of state reprisals. So intimidation, harassment, travel bans, criminalization of activities. And we documented this happening inside UN buildings, in Geneva, as Dolkan has explained, it happened to him, on journeys that unrepresented diplomats have made to Geneva and New York, and increasingly harassment and intimidation online. And it was online threats that emerged as a key theme then in our second report, which we published last year, Compromised Space and Undiplomatic Immunity, which was looking at how unrepresented diplomats have been disproportionately affected by the measures that the United Nations brought in during the pandemic. So this ranged from the cancellation and postponement of key forums that are really important to minority and Indigenous communities, including the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, so it relates directly to what Isla was talking about. The cancellation of side events, which are really key spaces within the UN that these communities can use to actually fully talk about issues that are timely and important. And what the move to online and hybrid sessions meant for these range of diplomatic actors. So that loss of kind of corridor diplomacy, of an ability to make connections in the UN and with permanent missions more generally. And then more seriously, the range of cybersecurity concerns that happen when diplomacy moves online, and that we're just simply not taken seriously enough by international organizations, certainly at the start of the pandemic. So this ranges from the use of insecure online platforms like Zoom to lack of policing of who's attending meetings, of diplomats having to self-censor for fear of state reprisals off the back of what they're saying at such meetings. So that's what we had documented in those first two Compromised Space reports. And I've been delighted with the work that Shima and the wider UNPO team have been doing, because the logical next step was to look at the issue of reprisals outside of the UN system, albeit related to it, and in particular in Europe. And I suppose for the two main reasons that are flagged so clearly in the report. First is that Europe has conventionally been seen as a safe haven, where individuals in fear of persecution, of state violence, have come to seek safety and to seek a base from which they can advocate on behalf of their communities. It's also the region in which has the highest concentration of international organisations headquartered. Right, so we've got the UN in Geneva, we've got the EU institutions, OECD, OSCE. The number is huge right across Europe. And these are key sites in which unrepresented diplomats seek to advocate for their communities. So at the same time as Europe is such a key location and should be a site of security and safety, as we've heard, there's been a real increase in reprisals and a real failure of European states, including those hosting the UN and other international bodies, to really recognise the scale and scope of this issue, to take it seriously and to act. And therefore, I think the report and the work that UNPO are doing is just so important and so timely. And the UNPO is in such a unique position really to undertake this work. As we've heard today, first-hand accounts of state reprisals are so powerful, right? These affect individuals, their families, people's lives, their freedom of movement, how they're able to communicate with family back home, what happens to family back home. And I think, you know, the report really is essential reading. It's really details work and the next steps in which the team will be interviewing a series of witnesses, as well as key individuals in European states who have responsibility to act on these issues, will lead to a really, really important piece of work to be released next year. And of course, I think we're looking at the tip of the iceberg here as well. We're talking about here, and the report flags 3 states of Iran, China and Russia, which are certainly leading the way in state reprisals. There's some crossover in techniques and all the rest of it. But I think it's important to realise, and I know this was brought up in the chat as well, this is far from unique to these 3 states. We're seeing authoritarian regimes across the world engaging in these tactics. We can think of the likes of Turkey, Pakistan, Nigeria, India. So I think raising these issues and making European states and the EU aware of the range of third-party states that really are engaging in this way. And of course, it's challenging the fundamental sovereignty of European states for these actions to be happening. And it's undermining the democratic values upon which Europe is so proudly based. So really significant issues that's happening on European territory. And it links to broader trends as well. We've seen a broader picture of these states, China in particular, seeking to shift the broader international agenda, trying to rewrite the rules of international relations. There's been a systematic undermining of the liberal values under which the international system is premised. So having that story alongside what's happening on the ground in European states, I think, is key to this. So now that the issue is being highlighted in such powerful ways, I think the imperative really is on European states and the EU and international organisations to act, and to put mechanisms in place to protect human rights defenders residing within their borders. So I want to kind of finish what I have to say with maybe thinking of a series of gaps in existing systems and ways of working, where the issue of third-party state reprisals is exposing these gaps that need to be addressed and addressed soon. The first, I suppose, is within EU policy, where crucially the likes of Iran, Russia and China are presented as external actors. But the agenda needs to be shifted in that extent. They need to be seen as key to internal affairs within European states, with our actions happening inside sovereign territory to European citizens and residents. And I think Harla's powerful point is that there needs to be training of police forces, of judiciary systems, to better understand the threats that human rights defenders from minority communities are facing today, and to take those threats really seriously. And that also requires a coordinated effort across European states. The second gap, I think, and it was also raised for Harla in her statement, is around media coverage. First of all, these cases need to be covered. They need to be given space in international media, and crucially need to be covered accurately. And it's coming back to that issue that we talked about earlier around the use of labels, and challenging the attachment of labels of separatists and terrorists to what are human rights defenders, to journalists and activists. And I was reflecting that, that there's been a lot of focus recently on the Pegasus project with spyware sold to authoritarian regimes that's been used to target activists and politicians and journalists, which has been fantastic. It's really raised the profile there. But the same level of investigative journalism really needs to be turned to this issue of third country reprisals as well. And I think the third set of gaps then is thinking, again, back to the UN system, where there's a real siloing of how these issues are dealt with. There is the UN Reprisals unit in Geneva, which is really taking these issues incredibly seriously, with annual reports, trying to coordinate understanding across the UN of these issues and trying to make different forums aware of it and identifying and tracing cases, which is super, but it's separated then from country desks for European states where these reprisals are happening, and country desks of the states we're talking about. There needs to be a joined up thinking across those parts of the UN system. I want to finally make the point then linked to that is that reprisals is a fundamentally transnational issue. These are state actions that are happening across borders, that are contravening understandings of territorial integrity and state sovereignty. And that's happening both in terms of state actions, of assassinations and threats and intimidation, but it's also happening in cyberspace, that extraterritorial space of the digital, where surveillance means that states can target actors, human rights defenders anywhere in the world at any time. That can break down communication with families, that can threaten families back home. So just as the threat is fundamentally transnational, it therefore requires a coordinated transnational and cross-border response. So I think the onus then is on states, on the EU, and on supranational and intergovernmental organisations to act and to coordinate their response accordingly. So we really need this new avenues of cooperation to better protect against reprisals at this time. So thanks again for the opportunity, and we really look forward to seeing the report being issued next year. Thanks, Shima.
Thank you very much, Dr. McConnell. Great intervention. I mean, you covered so many issues, especially from the minute these unrepresented diplomats go to UN in order to advocate for their right until when they get back to their home, and how they are their experience reprisal, discuss the gaps that exist in the EU cooperation, discussing many angles that we refer to in our report. I would just have to go back to Ms. Ayla Bakali, but Ms. Bakali, you only have 3 minutes because we are a little bit behind the program because of some the disconnection. But no problem, if you can finalize your testimony, I would be really thankful.
Yes, my apologies. I started with technical issues and I'm ending with technical issues. No, I just wanted to finalize. I think I pretty much summarized the points that I wanted to make. And I just wanted to share with everyone my observations after listening to 85% of the states making their opening statements before the opening session at the UN General Assembly this September. And of course, I listened to them virtually. And what I took note of was that there were so many states, nations that were questioning the P5, the veto power of the UN Security Council, and how it needs to be re-examined, and that the responsibility, they underlined that the UN Security's responsibility under the UN Charter is for the maintenance of international peace and security, and there were quite a few requests and demands for reform of the council. So I think that we are at a quandrum here, quandrum in the respect that here we are, as indigenous people, finds ourselves in the same vulnerable situation of other nation states who are questioning powers of other nations that are not following the international law and international framework. So I think I would like to close with that and step back and look at our statements and our situations and see the commonality that we also have with other nations who are occupied, who are also being violated, um, uh, who are being violated, and through military aggression and complete disregard for international law. So I just wanted to share that in serendipitously. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much, Ms. Bakali, for sticking to. Actually, you still had a little bit of time as well. But
That's
thank you
okay.
so much for concluding your testimony. Um, so, MEP Lega, we have a question in the public chat. If I can rephrase it because it's a little bit too long, I will rephrase it, and if you can answer us and then give your closing remarks, we would really appreciate it. So the question is, there is a great question in the chat, and it is that regarding the tools that the EU has to create a pressure to address the problems that we are here discussing today. I mean, this is a big question that we at UNPO also been grappling with. We see the EU has a range of really strong laws on criminal justice cooperation, but by making the issue of reprisal solely a foreign affair one, those tools are being used. So the question is, what are the things and what are the chances that we can have with this issue? Like, what are the areas of freedom of security and justice in regard to EU? What are basically what can EU do in order to at least deter these attacks and protect the victims and their families who sought refuge in Europe? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Riemann. Thank you for the question is a big one. It's a complicated one, and it's not easy to give a 1-minute answer. But I think that what we need to understand is that the European Union consists of 27 individual member states with also national sovereignty. So we need to work harder together in these issues, like with human rights, democracy, rule of law, but also climate, all these things that we actually can make a strong impact together. That's why we now invented the Magnitsky Sanctions, for example, to be able to impose sanctions on individuals, not only on state, to affect the perpetrators and not the people, which it will be in the other. So that is one. One other I mentioned in my introduction, that we need to get rid of the unanimity clauses when it comes to human rights, to be able to actually push quicker and faster without everyone agreeing. So those are two things that we can do. But I think that we need to have more discussions of this. If I may, should I just move over to my closing remarks, Rima, in this? Or because it's I mean,
Yes, yes, of course, no problem.
yeah, because we need to have longer discussions on how we can work together. I think the Foreign Affairs Committee is a good one to do it when it comes to human rights, and the subcommittee, because after that everything takes in plenary anyway. But I mean, I come from a Jewish heritage. Everyone on my father's side was murdered. Almost everyone was murdered in the Holocaust, and then they fled again in 1968 from Poland to Sweden. So these is listening to these stories. It's not only emotional objectively, but it also touches on me too. And I think that the European Union is based on the values created after the atrocities of war. So certainly we need to do more, and certainly we can do more. We just have to figure out how to do it. And I think that we are waking up, slow, but we are waking up, because the fact and the statement "never again," we need to keep that promise, and right now we are failing. So we need to be stronger. And that's why these kinds of discussions are so important. So don't hesitate in contacting me either in the future. Thank you so much for attending today.
Thank you so much for co-hosting this event. And as I said, you are one of the main friends of UNPO, because we have always been following up. You also been following up with our reports and updates about violations, especially in the case of Iran and Russia and China. We appreciate your participation and co-hosting. I don't think we have questions from the participants anymore. The other questions been answered during the webinar itself, and you're actually just right on time. I want to thank everybody who attended this meeting, everybody who helped us in co-hosting, all my colleagues, Lucia, James, Ralph, Merce, Alicia, and of course, again, thank you to all the participants who provided their testimonies and um, and enlightened us actually. And it was really both. I have to say, it really influenced me, because when you work on the report, you just read and you don't get the chance to actually think about all these people that you are writing about. But when you actually become face to face with the victims and the families of the victims, you acknowledge that what you're doing is important, because you are
You muted, Shima. We couldn't hear you.
It's not working, Shima.
Oh, but
I'm so
now.
sorry.
Yeah.
Now.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. It's okay. Yeah, I wanted just to give a special thank to Haura, because I know it must have not been easy, considering that just yesterday was the anniversary of the passing of Mr. Ahmed Moulanesi. But she came and opened her heart and her mind, and shared with us the story of her family, and also Mr. Dolkan Isa, and also Miss Ayla Bakali. I won't take much of your time. You are at the perfect time. It's 4 p.m. I wish you all a great afternoon. Thank you so much, and have a great rest of the day. Goodbye.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, Shima.